welcome Colleen Friend here this morning. She is indeed a friend of ours. Pleasure of hearing from you here for some time, several years. And I know personally I always learn so much when Colleen speaks. So please join me in welcoming Colleen Friend.
Hello, everybody. And when I heard Paula's introduction and said, yes, I've been here maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. But when I left my home at 7 o'clock in the morning, I think I forgot how long it takes to get here, especially when there's an accident on the 110. Sorry, Paula, I hope I didn't give you a heart attack. But I'm here, and I want to talk to you about my topic, which started out by saying the need for a more trauma-informed child welfare system. But as I was developing it into these overheads, I thought to myself, you know, we pretty much are moving in that direction. So I wanted to retitle it and say that we're moving towards a more trauma-informed child welfare system, because I believe that we are. So I'm going to start out by saying that it's important to have a trauma-informed child welfare system, and that's what my presentation is going to be about. But in the beginning, I want to say that I'm using the term child welfare in a broad sense. I'm talking about the Hub Child Protection Agency, and that also has spokes, and that is you guys. You guys that are contract providers, you guys that are community service people, caseworkers, direct service providers, therapists. It's important to think of yourself in that broad context, because my guess is 90% of you are probably mandated reporters on child abuse and neglect too, which also makes you part of the system. So I'm talking about the broad system here. And I also want to say that now I think we're moving towards being trauma-informed better than we were before. When the system is not trauma-informed, we may actually be creating more problems than we're solving. But now that we are becoming trauma-informed, we are participating in a process of helping these children and families that we're working with become healthier adults. And we in the community, we all have an interest in that. So we're stakeholders, and I contend that we're also consumers. So that's going to be my theme. It's going to be woven through the presentation today. And in the interest of full disclosure, I want to let you know that once upon a time when I was a little teeny tiny kid, I was a children's services worker. Just kidding. I did work for a child protection agency both in Los Angeles here, the one that we have now, which is called DCFS, and I also worked for another one in Ohio. I don't work for them now, but I do contract work for them. I train in the New Worker Academy, so I am pretty familiar with how they are trained. So that's what I wanted to start out with. And another part of my presentation today is I brought a jump drive, and I assumed that we could work that out, but we can't. So I have my little jump in my pocket, which is where it will stay. But you have handouts, and I think this is going to become like a little bit of an eye test, because I put 6 on a page, so I apologize about that. So if we can periodically refer to the notes here, at least you'll have some of the things that I'm talking about, because I'm going to refer you to some websites. Because whenever you see a presentation, you have to think, how can I use this material later on in my practice? So I have some stuff for you there that you can take with you. So in my overview slide, I'm also telling you that I'm dividing my presentation roughly into 4 areas. The first one, I'm going to talk about what the effects of trauma are on children, and especially children that are entering the child welfare system. And in the second part, I'm actually going to be talking about the trauma-informed practices that are recommended by several sources that I have in the presentation. And in the third part, I'm going to be talking about some of the local efforts to be able to do that. I'm going to be talking about what the Department of Children and Family Services is doing about disproportionality. Has anybody heard of that term before? Okay, so some people have, and I'll get to it when I get to that part. They're doing some things about disproportionality. They are also in a compliance effort with 2 statewide lawsuits, and I'll tell you mostly about the KDA lawsuit. Is that a familiar term for some people? Okay, so we'll talk about that. That's the second thing I'm going to talk about in the local efforts. I'm going to talk about the importance of complying with mandatory child abuse reporting laws, one of my favorite topics, and I'm also going to tell you about a case where perhaps there has been some lax compliance in that area and what that may mean for us. And then the last one, we're going to talk about the critical importance of 0 to 5 in child development and some of the efforts in that way and things that you can make use of in your practice. We'll tie it all together with the fourth part, and that'll be how do I make this useful in the work that I do here in Long Beach. Okay, so that's going to be it. So now I'm actually on I'm actually on slide 3. So for the introduction, children entering the child welfare system, or kids that are at what we might call high risk for entering the child welfare system, are likely to have elevated levels of stress for several reasons. First of all, it might be about the maltreatment that they endured in their own home, whatever level that may have been. The second thing is I want you to think about sort of the iatrogenic consequences of the investigation. This can be quite difficult for children. And so when we move to a more trauma-informed child welfare system, we're actually saying, how can we reduce that for children? Because it is quite difficult for them to A, talk about things that they may have experienced, and how about this one? Be involved in getting somebody it's somebody they know and care about. How about this? In trouble. You know? When you're talking to a children's services worker, it's usually not a temperature check. It's usually something has happened, you know? I always say that, when you meet a children's services worker, it's kind of like when one of us meets somebody from the IRS. It's not always good news, or when the highway patrol officer, when you're exercising your right to go, I tell my students, constitutional right to go 80 on the freeway. And the highway patrol person pulls up behind you and reminds you that there are agents of social control in the world that we have to listen to. We're not that happy, So we want to think about what some of our devices are for coping with that, because this is quite difficult for children too. Okay, so the third thing that they may experience too is what happens and what's their stress level if there is a placement outside of the home. Now here in LA County, we have roughly about 31,000 children in the care of the Department of Children and Family Services. Approximately, depending on the given day and time in the year that you take that temperature check, there's about 20,000 of them that are in out-of-home care. So we're looking at, the prospect of children being in out-of-home care and trying to sort through what all of this means left to their own devices. So we have to think about, yes, when children are involved in the child welfare system, there is indeed an opportunity for very high stress. The second point I want to make, and I'm also on that third slide right here, is one that David Finkelhorn makes very well in his new book called Developmental Victimology. And I think he's made a wonderful contribution to the literature in that, because he has said that because of children's unique vulnerability and because of their developing system, a sort of a problem early on gets magnified, it gets much bigger as they age. And so when you have a child who's been exposed to violence or in fact abused, you have the kernel of something that can have serious effects later on. And so he calls it developmental victimology. And I think you guys are probably very familiar with that concept. So my next two slides are talking about the short-term impact of children who, entering the child welfare system, may be experiencing some level of stress. So I have, my first bullet is about depression, and all of you know that depression manifests itself in children very differently than it does in adults. It can be aggressive, acting out behavior, irritability, whereas some of us would sort of describe or present in a very different way if we were depressed. There's the prospects of disassociation, and how about the hyperarousal that comes with always having to be prepared for what's going to come around the corner. And actually I've seen kids, that can't really concentrate in school because they're really listening to what's going on in the hallway, because that's what they got to get ready for. So there are a lot of short-term consequences for children who are stressed coming into the child welfare system that, as you can imagine, would affect their school performance. If you're wondering what's happening out in the hallway, you're certainly not listening to what's going on in the classroom, and therein lies the prospect for getting further and further delayed and difficulties with academic success and achievement. And what happens after that? Dropout. So I have down here other things: attention and memory issues, affect regulations issues, and this is going to be another thing that comes again in my presentation, because children that are stressed have a lot of difficulty maintaining their affect, and a lot of times this is difficult for us as service providers, even teachers, in maintaining them in the classroom. And the last bullet is emotional difficulties and relational difficulties that actually could last a lifetime. So if you go into the next slide, which is the long-term effects, the long-term effects could be the persistence of any of these short-term consequences. And then we also think that these kids are probably very high risk for substance abuse, to be able to try to, in some way, get in there and try to regulate themselves. And we have cognitive issues due to some of the attenuated development issues from the abuse they may have experienced either in their own homes or by the system. And then I always never miss a chance to talk about the ACE study. Who here has heard of the ACE study? Very good. You must have gone to UCLA. Okay. I know Erica, she was my student many years ago. Okay. So the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, actually is really important for all of us to just sort of at least have a passing acquaintance with. So what these guys did that put it together is that they looked at 17,000 Kaiser subscribers, Kaiser service recipients in the San Diego area. And they put their brains together and said, okay, what are kind of the 9 most sort of common adverse childhood experiences? That's where you get the ACE that happen to people. And so they came up with these 9 things. I'm probably not going to remember all 9 of them, but things like, witnessing a parent's being the recipient of violence, or how about actually being abused or neglected themselves. Another one is living with a person in their household who has a serious mental health problem, including being suicidal. Or someone in the household has been incarcerated. Okay, so I think I got 4, and I'm wondering if I can remember any more. Can anybody remember? There were 9 of them.
Living with addicted.
Thank you. Living with somebody in the household who has a drug usage problem. So we're coming on close to 6, but it was of that ilk. And the point of this is they were very curious about, do adverse experiences in childhood, do they have a connection to what Kaiser's interested in, how they're later on their health, their physical health? And what do you think the answer was?
Yeah.
Yes, resoundingly yes. What they found out was that at least, I think, 52% of the people in this 17,000 member study had at least one ACE in their childhood. And I think I have down here 25% had at least 2 or more. And they found a clear correlation between the number of ACEs, that would be your ACE score from 1 to 9, the number of ACEs you had in your childhood, and the kinds of things you presented with in your adulthood in terms of disease of the heart, the liver, and the lung. Those are just starting out. Included diabetes. They looked at some very common adult diseases and connected them to the ACEs. But another thing they said that was very important, I'm sorry, but I should stop moving. Another thing they said that I thought was really astounding is they said they connected the ACEs to the coping behaviors. Coping behaviors being smoking, drinking, weight. They said weight issues because it's going to be weight loss and not eating as well as eating. So this was fascinating. So they've clearly established this link here. And whenever I talk to groups like this, I'm saying, we can't afford to ignore this information, especially when dealing with our child welfare population. Because if you think about the cases that you've had from the child welfare system, you can right off the bat, I only got to 6 or 7 ACEs, but you can think of many of the kids that you've dealt with that probably have 4 or 5. So we've already have a situation where these kids are predisposed to have physical issues in their adulthood as well as public health problems that smoking and drinking and weight issues are. So those are the long-term impacts of having ACEs. Post-traumatic stress in children. So I want to move along to the very last slide on page 1. And post-traumatic stress in children, I want to start out by saying it occurs when children witness, or how about if they witness or they experience some overwhelming event. They see somebody that they care about injured or harmed, or there's an injury that portends to be serious, or possibly is life-threatening or has resulted in death. So when they experience it themselves or they see someone else have it, they meet the qualifications for this definition of post-traumatic stress. Many children entering the child welfare system do meet that definition, and these events overwhelm them and may alter their neurobiological structures of their brain. And the research is really clear about this. So this is another reason I think that's really inspiring this move to be trauma-informed in the child welfare system, because we have these little kids with these multiple, as we might call them, ACEs, and we have some potentially serious neurobiological alterations going on. And lastly, many but not all children with these symptoms experience multiple forms of traumatization and may actually qualify for what we call complex trauma. Now I'm over on the other side. But complex trauma is not always what occurs to children. So I don't want to say, if you're in the child welfare system, you have post-traumatic stress or you have complex trauma. Because really, to qualify for complex trauma, you need a couple more things. You need the abuse to happen at an early age. It has to happen on some level of frequency. And here's an important qualifier. When we're talking with children in the child welfare system, it's typically happening, I'll just call it loosely, in the caregiver network. If it's not happening among their immediate family members, it's happening among extended family members or caretakers. And if you read that bullet a little bit further, it says, okay, happens in the extended care network or parents are not responsive. The child doesn't have somebody that they can go to who could say, it'll be okay. This doesn't happen to everybody. I'm going to help you. We're going to take care of this. Everything's going to be okay. So these children who are experiencing complex trauma are pretty much left to themselves to be able to sort this out. And if you think about it, if we're talking about kids who may have been detained, removed from their home, placed in substitute care, there's a high proportion of them, once they come into the system, who might meet that and might be placed outside of the home. They may be sorting through this stuff all on their own, ladies and gentlemen. And that is astounding. So what the system is trying to do, and you're going to see several themes in my presentation today, is to try to get in there and do a mental health assessment right away. This is what the KDA decision is about, so that we can get these kids assessed and then get them connected into mental health services so they don't have to go through this little process about, did I tell on my mom? Am I bad? Did I cause that? Oh, my mom's in jail. Oh, I'm not at home. My younger brothers and sisters, they're somewhere else. This could be my fault. This is their dilemma. So we're trying to get them mental health services as soon as possible. Okay. I'm on the next slide over. Post-traumatic stress is a subjective experience for children. And I put this in here because what I do teach in the training academy for the Department of Children and Family Services is I teach them interviewing. I teach them interviewing adults and interviewing children. Okay, now slight disclaimer, I have 1 day with them. Okay, did that tell you everything you needed to know? Okay, so I have 1 day with them, and the same training does not go out to the supervisors. So my other part of my training is like, and we all know this from social work, if we train somebody and we don't train the supervisor to reinforce it, we have got some nice behavior for, I'd say, maybe for a month, maybe for some students 3 months. But if the supervisor is not asking about it and saying, how did that happen? What did you try in this 10-step method? These techniques quickly, sort of fall away. And people are left to their own devices, almost as if, keep it a secret, you never did any training at all. So, we're working on this, but working on this is a process. And so we're trying to see what we can do about offering them more callback training and also involving the supervisors in the process so that they can reinforce what we're actually teaching. But I do digress for a moment because what I really wanted to talk about now was that trauma-informed practices identified by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So I'm actually on page 2, in the middle of the page, 3. I'm on block number 3, slide 3. So now I'm going to describe about 6 of the recommendations from this network. And you guys are really fortunate that you had, and for the remaining time being, you have one over at Miller Children's Hospital. McCavick Center has been funded by this process too. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is from the work of McCavick and from Cheryl Langtree and John Briere and the amazing work that they've done in the Long Beach community to be able to research, what is going on when children are removed and exposed to complex trauma and what we can do as service providers to actually address some of their issues. So here they have is just 6 things. And the first one is establish an immediate sense of safety for the child. But of course, if you're establishing an immediate sense of safety for the child, it's got to be true. Because I know sometimes people say, oh, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. But you know what? The kid has to go home. And the risk has not been removed from the kid. So now what did you just create in yourself? You've made yourself a liar. You've made yourself untrustworthy, another adult that the kid can't really rely on. So when we think of point number 1, we want to think about what can we do to help create a safer environment for the child and help the child feel a little more safe with honoring that, you may not have complete control over the environment here. And so sometimes the child becomes a partner in, do they have an effective adult ally they can go to? Sometimes, as service providers, we're doing harm reduction. May not be perfect, but sometimes we're working with the child around what the resources they have, what's the clay, I sometimes say, the clay that they have, and how can they make it work for them. So, connect the child with professionals who can help. That's where you come in. So connecting the child with professionals that can, sort of help the child. What happened to you in the last month? What were you thinking? What's your reaction? And also, I'm going to sort of fast forward and say that much of what I got from Cheryl and John, and many of you have probably been to their learning community too, is to say that sometimes working in this area can be re-traumatizing for us. I mean, who among us hasn't had a traumatic experience or a loss? And sometimes coming up with these children who've had a series of losses can also be very stimulating for us and be, help facilitate our thinking about maybe how unsafe the world may be and may lend itself to some blind spots that we have in terms of working with them. So one of the recommendations is always getting really good help for the service provider in terms of any post-traumatic stress or compassion fatigue that they may be experiencing in working with these children. Okay, so get them connected with professionals who can help them out right away. And 3, assess the ripple effects and coping strategies following the trauma. Sometimes children have some good coping devices, and sometimes it's very effective in the moment. But sometimes it persists beyond the extinction of the stimuli. And so what we need to do as mental health professionals is try to help kids deal with, okay, that worked then, but what are we going to do now? So thinking about how we can help them problem solve and engage them in the process. And so trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy engages kids in trying to make those kinds of connections between their experience, how they can understand it, and how they want to operate in the world right now. 4th, support the child's family or caretaker. And this is going to be a theme in my presentation too, because when I'm looking at some of the initiatives that are out there to help children, and First 5 initiatives, there are federal services out there that are mandated for kids that come into the system early on. And so by reporting the reasonable suspicion and getting the child involved in the child welfare system, I'm saying, there's actually some benefit to it as well. So getting them the help they need from some of the federal initiatives early on. And the 6th one, and I don't want to go too fast here, I don't think I gave enough justice to supporting the parent and the caretakers, because as I said, when we have to support therapists that are doing this kind of work and thinking about how re-stimulating it is, what about the parents? Oftentimes I've dealt with parents who've had a lot of traumatic events themselves, and dealing with the child's trauma, you guys can probably finish my sentence, is very stimulating for reawakening some of the unresolved issues in their own childhood. So they may not be able to cope with it. And if a child is depressed and acting as many depressed children do, aggressively, acting out, irritable, don't we indeed have an accident waiting to happen if we have parents who also have their own trauma? Okay. 5, coordinate with service providers. This is what I also wanted to mention to you as well, because I think when clients enter the system, we need to put lenses on to help us see the system through our client's eyes. It's quite a maze. The Department of Children and Family Services, does anybody know how many offices they have? Okay, 18. So I'll tell you a story. I work at Cal State LA. I run an institute for child maltreatment. It's called the Child Abuse and Family Violence Institute. Now, I don't know how this happens, but I'll tell you that when people call 411 and they say they want to report child abuse, there are several operators that give them our telephone number at Cal State LA. So this means that they had to get through the general telephone number for Cal State LA, say they want to do child abuse, and then somehow it gets to me. So invariably, 3 or 4 times a week, I pick up the phone, I say Child Abuse and Family Violence Institute, and out launches I want to tell you about something that happened, and you can sort of hear it coming on, and you go, excuse me, sir, but were you hoping that you had reached the Department of Children and Family Services and you wanted to report a concern about child abuse? Yes! And then they launch right into it again. And I go, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You could tell me this, but I just want to tell you, I'm not the right place. So you need to call the child, and I give them the child abuse hotline. But I want to tell you that if this happens to me on a small scale, 3 or 4 times a week, think about how confused, now this is a whole party of people that are confused. You know, the operator's confused. I have tried to address that. It doesn't work. So I'm left with, try to cope with on the other end. And then I have to train the other people that work in my office. When this comes on, this is how you have to respond. And we have to catch it before they sort of tell us everything, and then we have to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. But then then God created answering machines. So I leave my answering machine on at night and on the weekend, and I come in on Monday, and I've got a long litany of somebody who's called up on twice, three messages, not enough, about the same case, and left me material. So really important that we try to look at the system the way the clients see it, because they're not all of them, but occasionally they can be confused about what to do, who to reach. I've had people call me up and think that they could find their Department of Children and Family Services social worker from me. I'm not sure how that happens, but it does. You wanted to say something?
Yesterday morning, at like 4:30 minutes, on whatever TV station I had on, just came on one little sentence. If you suspect child abuse, call 911. But how many 911 operators would have to be trained?
Wow.
What is your emergency? I suspect child abuse. That strikes me as people getting told that isn't an emergency. I mean, they could be on the list. So
my
maybe it
God,
must be
yeah.
that kind of.
That strikes me as very, very problematic. I mean, really, when it's, as mandated reporters, you have the option of reporting to law enforcement when it's an emergency, or reporting, hopefully, to the Department of Children and Family Services for situations that, are tweaking your reasonable suspicion monitor. And so you really want to have more time to be able to talk to somebody at the child abuse hotline and explain your concerns. Thanks for mentioning that. So that goes to the point, we have to sort of see the system in some way, the way that our clients do, and try to use every opportunity we can to try to help them understand how it works, or maybe the other side, how it doesn't work, or what they can do to back up. Because sometimes I spend a lot of time on the phone, like, when you do finally reach your social worker, how are you going to remember who he or she is? Just trying to do some coaching things around, this is really important. And people tell me the most interesting things. I haven't met her for like 3 months, and our court case is coming up, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'll call 911. But I think this is so important, and I stay on the phone and try to say, listen, you really got to find this person. Calm down, and I'll help you. And I want you to call this telephone number, and if you can't find who it is, call me back. Do you promise you'll call me back? Here's my name, here's my number, now you have my number. Let me hear you, can you just tell it back to me so that I know that you have it? Because I know sometimes I call the main hotline, or switch, not the hotline, but the switchboard of the Department of Children and Family Services. And sometimes they have a recording saying they'll get back to you. Has anybody experienced that? Can I have a show of hands of people who've been called back? Okay. So the moment, I shouldn't tell you my secrets. Are there any children's services workers here? Okay, good, now we can talk. I'm just teasing. But when I get that recording, when I call 213-351-5602, which is their sort of main switchboard, and when I get that recording, I just hang up. Because I've had the experience of them not calling me back. So you know what I do? I call the director's office. And I say to the person there, I said, I'm really sorry that I have to do this, but I called, your main line, and I got the recording, and until, I realize I'm not creating very many circumstances where they can call me back. I realize I stopped my experiment. But I conducted my experiment over 2 years and never got a call back. So then I called the director's office, and I asked for the number that I need, and then I get the information. I'm not recommending that everybody do this, because we'll flood the system, but I was just trying to help you think about, what kind of things do you have at your disposal, because usually when you need something, it's time sensitive and you gotta have it right away.
Yeah, a few years ago, I started teaching a survival technique for dealing with the bureaucracy. There's a trick with DCFS.
Okay,
If you go down a couple of numbers, you're likely to get a service worker in that particular area. And then they will track someone down if you get them on the line.
That's
And then
true.
they'll also give you the name and phone number for the supervisor or the duty worker or whatever. So I've had a lot of parents be very, if the first two, then you go down two more. And keep going down until you get someone in the office that knows that worker that you're trying to get.
that's a great idea.
works.
You should do a study on that. Yeah, because you can get the unit
It's a
worker.
little trick, huh?
You can get the unit
You end up
secretary.
in the unit, oftentimes you get the worker, oh yeah, she's over there.
I can see her.
I can
Then
see
you
her.
know. Then you know she's actually there. Okay, so we should have like a little
Brainstorm.
brainstorming session and put all these techniques together because it's a morass for people on the outside. Now, it's difficult enough for us, so we have to sort of think about how do they see it. And I think I covered the last one. Let's see, training professionals to manage their own stress level, if indeed, it is stressful, and also if it's evocative of some of their own stressful childhood experiences. And they also recommend engaging professionals in learning collaboratives to shorten the amount of time, because the research is, they say things like research takes, 15, 13 years to filter down from the time it gets published actually in practice. So developing these learning collaboratives, which have been happening at the cabinet and have happening throughout our country as a part of this National Children's Traumatic Stress Network, shortens the time, I think, between the time that they develop the technique, practice it, teach it, and you're actually able to implement it. Okay, now, I'm actually on the bottom of page 2, recommendations for best practice for mental health and child welfare. Okay, I have a couple things on here. And I have a website for you because I am eternally grateful for the Casey Foundation, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and Casey Family Programs, because they've done a couple of things that I'm talking about today. And one of the important things they've done is they've collaborated with this REACH Institute. And I have the website here. If you'd like to look at, they developed in 5 general areas, they developed 48 recommendations for making the child welfare system more sensitive to children's mental health issues. It's actually quite good, and I didn't want to write all 48 things here, so I sort of, I just randomly pulled out, I think maybe 10. And I wanted you to notice that there's a convergence between what the REACH and the Casey Foundation is saying about children's mental health issues and how to address them, and also this compliance with the KDA lawsuit that the department is actually doing. So here's some of the things they're saying about. So I'm on the 2 top slides on page 3, recommendations for best practice. They're talking about doing an initial mental health screening initially when the child comes into the system, and actually doing one in very close proximity when the child enters any other phase of work with the Department of Children and Family Services, such as initial placement. And that's to cover that issue about what do kids do when they're in placement and they're left to their own devices. They don't have anybody to talk this over with. They're feeling guilty. They're feeling like, was this my fault? So one of the top recommendations is initial mental health screening and quick rescreening and frequent periodic screenings. Child welfare agencies should track outcomes. How about this one? Coming at you fast. Client satisfaction. Whoa! Who would have thunk it? That we would be sitting here thinking about tracking client satisfaction and child welfare. But ladies and gentlemen, they're on it. They are trying to do that. And this is very important because this has not happened for a while. And if you think about it, who among us in private industry would avoid or not even do any attention to what our clients think about the service that we're delivering? So this is important. Improving access to wraparound services and therapeutic foster care. And then coming up to, let's see, providing evidence-based training for clinicians. How about this one? Using peer family mentors. So finding people in the system that are graduates of the system that we can sort of train and have them be advocates for the clients that are in the system. Thinking that the clients are more likely to trust those people or have an affinity with them, and they may do the kind of things that you just did with me, sort of insider to insider. Look, when they ask you this, I think you should say that. So, but actually trying to professionalize these people and give them some in-service training and make them part of the workforce. And you're going to see that they are doing this. They're actually doing this in their work on disproportionality. So if I come to some of these other of the 48 recommendations, provide a differential response, and the Department of Children and Family Services is doing that. Those of you what are you talking about with a differential response? That's when a case comes into the system, it's identified according to structured decision making as fairly low risk. They might have an alternate response. They may contract with some of your agencies to provide the monitoring or the interaction under a voluntary family maintenance agreement, or they may not do anything at all. They may just have some sort of an agreement with you to provide the service and get back to them with the option of kicking it up a notch if the family does not take advantage of your services. But recommendations for a differential response are actually being implemented at DCFS right now. And it says here further that every child should have a qualified legal advocate. And how about involving youth alumni in service planning and actually in client satisfaction? These are kind of really novel ideas, and one that we really think is important, and they are doing it at DCFS, attempting to provide support to kids as they age out of the system, even up until age 21. Now, it's not provided for every kid up to age 21. It means you have to get some really good advocacy, but you can see me after, because I know a few tricks myself.
One question going back to utilize peer family members and train them as professional staff. It seems to be a contradiction. If you're going to have a mentor, then you're going to want them mentoring, but then you want them to be the professional, act as professional staff?
What they're saying is you might pull somebody from if you come to the Department of Children and Family Services and you have your kid in the system, you might say, well, my mom went through this too. And then there might be an interview process that says, can we meet your mom? And assess whether or not your mom would be a good peer mentor for you. Then, once you're out of the system, you might train your mom to actually be a peer mentor for other cases that are coming into the system.
But
this is what they're doing.
Being a peer mentor and being professional staff, in my mind, just seems like a contradiction.
Okay, it could be. Initially, I agree that they probably are just a family member that gets some paraprofessional training, but the thought is to be able to develop a track within Children's Protective Services to be able to make these, they call them parent partners. They call them different things, and different agencies call them different things, but it's actually been an active part of some of the contracts that DCFS has put out, that you have to have a parent partner. Are you guys familiar with that? That parent partners are actually parts of private nonprofit agencies that have a contract with DCFS. They actually do have to have a parent partner available, and that parent partner has to have some professional training. But you make an interesting point. If they have some level of professional training, does that indeed make them unprofessional? Probably not. But the thought is, in this recommendation report, is that we really need to cultivate these people and bring them into the system and have them available to be peer support mentors for the families that we're serving. Okay, so what are the efforts to disseminate the information? So I'm on page 3 and about the middle. Efforts to disseminate the information. Well, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network has a child welfare training kit, and you can go to this website and you can see what it's recommending, and it has some very useful ideas, and it helps us think, you know, how can we make trauma-informed decisions about the families that we're working with? How can we try to understand it from their point of view? And the other thing that they have there in this website, I'm going to recommend it again, they have wonderful learning opportunities there. You can learn about all kinds of speaking opportunities they have through the web. They have called them webinars, where you actually sort of turn on your computer and call into a line and actually hear somebody speaking, and you actually get sort of a PowerPoint presentation. And it's actually, I've engaged in a couple of them, and they are very interesting. And there's actually some free training involved at these websites and good discussion groups. So I think you might want to think about putting that on your Rolodex. The other thing that I recommend is the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse. California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse, and I have the website there. And if you haven't had an opportunity to visit that, this is a collaborative effort on behalf of Rady Children's Center and the California Department of Social Services. And what they have there is a searchable website, and you can plug in the problem, child sexual abuse, Or you can put in the name of a treatment program like the Incredible Years. Say I'm looking for parenting programs. I can put in Incredible Years. I can search by the program. And I can find out how it's rated research-wise on a scale of 1 to 5. I won't go into all that with you. But you can also find how it gets a rating in terms of child welfare relevance. And they have pretty high standards. In order to get a 1, you have to be the intervention has to be part of a random clinical trial with results that have held for over a year. Oh my God, that's pretty high. So we have a wonderful website, and I'm going to recommend at the very end that you visit this website. And how about this? Tell your clients about it. Now I know that some of us say, well, they don't have a computer, but that's why there's a public library. They can go to the public library and they can find out, what are the evidence-based parenting programs. If you're going to go through one, it might as well be one that has some evidence of showing some important results that have held longer than a year. So the last one I have here is the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence Across the Lifespan. And this was actually initiated at the IVAC conference in San Diego and is being actually recapped in several conferences across the country, thinking about, if we made an effort to do this, to end child abuse, which is part of your name too, and we actually got together and made a plan. Nothing happens without a plan. If we made a plan to do that, what would it look like and how would we begin to be able to implement it? So these are just a few things, but I think very worthy things to visit websites of. Now, I'm going to talk to you about disproportionality and efforts to address it. And some of you may have heard of this. They have various different acronyms, and they sometimes call it eliminating racial disproportionality and disparities. So sometimes you've heard of this under ERDD. Does that sound familiar? Okay, so this is the insider story. They sometimes call this ERDD. And what this means, it's the level, disproportionality is the level at which children, groups of children in the system are disproportionately present in excess to their, how can I say, occurrence in the normal population. And does anybody know what 2 groups this really affects? African American kids. Thank you, Native American kids, very importantly. And the Department of Children and Family Services has made some really, really strong efforts in this area. And I go like this because I say, ladies and gentlemen, it's been painful. Because when there's such a dramatic overrepresentation of African American kids and Native American kids in the child welfare system, it's not just about reporting. This is about them getting over-reported to their occurrence in the population. Then they get substantiated at higher levels. Now, they also get adjudicated to be part of, the Welfare and Institutions Code at higher levels. They get placed outside of their home at higher levels. They stay in care longer, and they don't get reunified. Now, to me, that's 6 strikes. It seems like you're definitely out, okay? So they have taken some real strides to be able to look at themselves and say, this isn't just about, public providers noticing them more. This isn't just the connection to poverty. We have to look at ourselves and say, are we unevenly applying standards to these families? So they've done some dramatic things, and I have some things down there, and I'll tell you just briefly about them. The Pomona Department of Children and Family Services, the office that's out there, has done some incredible things in this area. And the Metro North office, which is in Vermont and Wilshire, is working on this, as well as Pasadena. What they've done in Pomona is they did some really interesting things. They invented news-busting or myth-busting newsletters because they needed to go to the staff and say, what are you doing? You have to look at yourself. And of course, all the people on say, I'm not doing this. I'm just applying standards evenly to everybody. But they initiated case reviews, which were very difficult. Now, all of us in this room are, professionals, and we like to think, we're applying our ethical principles and so forth, and we're making good decisions. Okay, well, how do you feel if I get a panel of the 3 of you to come over and look at my work? How do I feel about that? I don't feel so good about that. That's a little scary. So you're meaning you don't believe that I just did what I told you I was doing? Well, blessed are those who actually go through a review. So part of what we're doing with the Department of Children and Family Services and new worker training is to say, yes, you have autonomy to make decisions, but you have to be linked to your supervisor, who hopefully is bringing these things to your awareness. What kind of reasonable efforts are you performing? And the other thing that's happening is you have to be receptive to a case review. So then people start to act with a forethought. You know, I've got to apply these things because, you know, in 2 or 3 weeks, somebody's going to be saying, hey, did you do X? Did you do Y? Did you think of going to this agency? Did you search for that? What else did you do? So really important that they understand that this is by case review. And the third thing they've done is they've hired a group of what they call cultural ambassadors. So these are people that have been through the system. They may not be on that particular family, so they're not in-family mentors, but they've hired these cultural ambassadors, and they've really studied that when the families that come into the system get a cultural ambassador, who can finish my sentence?
They get reunified more.
They get reunified quicker, and they spend less time in the system. Oh wow, who knew? So it's turning out to be a very effective practice, but it means that DCFS had to reach out. They didn't just think this up. They had to go on the web and say, you know, what's happening? And then they had this partnership with Casey. And Casey said, you know, like Colombo, I'm not too sure, but I think they're doing something like this in Fresno. What if we funded you to go up to Fresno and look at this and see how this practice is working and bring it back? So that's indeed what they did do. And they're to be commended for that. Okay, compliance with 2 statewide lawsuits. I'm going to move kind of quickly now because I want to make sure that I get all through my last page. I'm in the bottom of page 3. There's one lawsuit that's still outstanding in the state of California called the Emily Q lawsuit. These lawsuits have children's names and last initials because they're initiated in the Juvenile Dependency Court, which is confidential. And this lawsuit is making sure, or attempting to make sure, that kids have a decent shot at getting TBS services, Therapeutic Behavioral Services in the home. But let me go back, and I'm going to go on to KDA and tell you more about KDA. Because what happened in LA County, KDA is the state of California, but LA County said, we're just going to settle this thing. We're going to do it for a lot of complex reasons. So the KDA lawsuit said that children need access to fairly quick, timely mental health services, and they have to be directed at foster children, or how about kids that are high risk for becoming foster children, to help them stay, to improve access to wraparound services and stay in their own homes. So that's the focus of the KDA. And so the KDA decision is really transforming training, so they're putting a lot of training into the New Worker Academy and into the in-service that's very focused on this. So I have some of the things that what they're doing is, they are actually, each region of DCFS has this thing that they use a lot of acronyms. They call it a CSAT. The CSAT is the Coordinated Services Action Team. And so this Coordinated Services Action Team, you know, what would you have if you didn't have action, right? So they have a lot of action things. And they are actually making sure that kids are getting a mental health assessment at the gate. And they're doing a lot of things. They're doing a multidisciplinary assessment. They have these other acronyms, MAT, multidisciplinary assessment team meetings, to make sure that kids are getting a screen. And they've actually worked with an institute in the state of California to develop a screening tool. Now the issues of reliability and validity on that are yet outstanding, but the point is they have a tool for screening to see if the kids need for their services, and they are implementing this. Okay. The KDA practice improvements projections, I have these all in the future tense. You know, the bottom line is, if you scout down to the last one, it says they're really trying to reduce the caseloads. That's ultimately what they're trying to do. But in the meantime, what they're projecting is kids are going to get more. I'm actually on page 4, I'm on my last page. We're in the home stretch here. Kids are actually going to get mental health services in a timely fashion. They think that this is going to actually reduce timelines here, and kids are going to spend less time in foster care, and I'm with them, I think so. They're going to have improved placement stabilities. Kids are not going to have to be removed because of their coping behaviors, which may make them undesirable to especially their specialty rate foster homes. And they are going to reduce, the other thing they really want to do is reduce hospitalization rates for children, and this is really important. We have a lot of psych hospitalization rates on these kids sometimes, and get better data to drive decisions, but ultimately reduce the caseload. So how is this all related to mandatory reporting? So essentially, mandatory reporting drives the system. But beyond that, I want you to think about, I think mandatory reporting is so important because it provides key leverage points at the very beginning parts of a case. And that's where you want your key leverage points. So what it does do is mandatory reporting brings a case into the system for intervention, and how about this, for observation. For observation, or how about, just partnering, to be able to interrupt something that may be going on. But I think it brings leverage into the system because the Department of Children and Family Services can say, we will do a voluntary case maintenance. They call this a VFM. We'll do a VFM if you do the following things. We won't open a case on you. Now, is that an incentive for people? I find that it is. So that your referral, your mandatory referral, allows for these early leverage points so that perhaps we can get in, do something, and I say the broad child welfare system can get in, do something on the case, and be able to get out without causing too much of a record to be generated. It's an early opportunity for monitoring, and how about this? I want to tell you that it brings federally mandated interventions for kids that are 0 to 5. And if you don't believe me, I want you to go to the First 5 website. The First 5 LA website, and I have it here on one of the things that you can do. We'll talk to you about some of these really important things like the Protective Factor Framework, the PFF. The Protective Factor Framework is what many partnership agencies engage in, which is around, things that you could probably, self-identify. We put you in a small group. Getting families timely intervention, when they have a crisis. Providing for parent education. Giving them more knowledge about child development. Giving them connections and social connections to the community and social supports. So many of the agencies, that engage in this partnership, loose network, operate with these ideas. Now, why would a parent object to any of this? In fact, most of them don't. So that your referral, your mandated response and referral to DCFS can actually help families get these services. However, notice my next slide, some mandated reporters do not report. Does that shock you? Well, the research is, and it's actually done in our own community, sort of uneven here. Excuse me. Okay. 40% of mandated reporters don't respond. At some point, and let me say it more accurately about what the research said. Zellman said, at some point in our careers, at some point, doesn't mean all the time, but at some point we've made a decision, 40% of us have made a decision not to report. Why? We make a decision not to report because A, we think we can do better. We don't have confidence in the system. We're afraid that the client may terminate, and we're thinking with our relationship we can maybe do better. So those are the reasons why sometimes people don't report. And so when Zellman made this public, this was really important to try to address this. So this has also gone in to Children's Protective Services agencies across the country to think about how can we improve our image? How can we say that we are doing better? How can we have inspired more confidence? But I also want to draw your attention to something really important. And so when you do these kinds of talks, you get to give like 2 minutes of something that really is, really gets to you. I want to share with you that there's a high profile possibility in our community that there hasn't been a report on for a long time, and I'm referring to the Los Angeles County Archdiocese. And I want you to look at that paragraph that I have here about non-reporting. The California Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, which I am a member of, it's called CAFSAC, we have asked the district attorney to account to us about any, let's call it, possible violations of the mandatory reporting law that may have been engaged in by the Los Angeles County Archdiocese when in the context of this clergy child sexual abuse scandal. So we've had a presentation canceled because the U.S. attorney decided to take up an investigation to find out if people in the parishes were getting honest services. What a novel concept. So other groups have gone in, groups from UC Davis have said, we want a presentation. So I'm bringing this to you and thinking, here's the facts of at least one case that I know of, but there's many cases out there. But the Michael Baker case. Michael Baker is no longer a priest. In fact, he is in prison. And Michael Baker, there's ample evidence on the record that he disclosed that he had a problem with little boys, that he told Mahoney that he molested boys in 1985. He told him this. He told him that he had this problem. In 1986, Michael Baker was sent to a treatment agency. Now, in 1986, when I worked in this community, people that had this problem were reported and they were put on child threat probation officers' caseloads, and they were carefully monitored with an order that they couldn't be with a kid that's under the age of 14, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But not Michael Baker. Oh no. He goes to a treatment agency. Then he comes back and he goes to multiple parishes after that. Who knows? Possibly accumulating more victims. I'm not saying that I know that, but there's a prospect there. And this is not reported. He is taken out of the priesthood in 2000. And when did it get reported? In 2002. Now, what I want to say to you is, what does this say to you about being a mandated reporter? Because all of you have been in a difficult situation where I don't know if it's reasonable suspicion, but you think you should report, but you're worried that the client's going to terminate, and maybe you'd be better if you just kept them in here, and you're thinking, oh, do I really have to report? And you go to your colleague or you go to your boss and it's a liability issue and you have to do it. And you guys have to bite the bullet, as well as I do. Not everybody. So I'm just bringing this to your attention in terms of, as child abuse professionals and advocating for mandatory reporting practices which drive the system, which will then bring these kids potentially into the system so there can be some hope of monitoring and intervention. I'm just putting it out there for your thoughts and considerations.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this exists, but how great would it be if, when a report is made, if nothing is found to act upon, that family's still got some kind of follow-up? Because the investigation itself is traumatizing for the family. And yet, if there's nothing found, my sense is that then they're just left to float off.
That's true. Yeah.
Nobody comes in and says, wow, to have a sheriff show up on the doorstep, to have your child interviewed, that's uncomfortable, that creates dissonance in the family. How can we help? We recognize that nothing was going on, that nothing's been found, and there's going to be no action. But can we help clear up the situation that we've created?
Well, your idea has merit, and let me tell you what I think they are doing. Pursuant to some of the stuff that was in the paper this summer, you guys all read the LA Times online? Okay. But in the LA Times, they had several families where it was unfounded, several children, and some children ended up dead. And so Supervisor Molina finds this highly unacceptable, especially if it's happening in her spa. So she said, and got together and said, we want these kids to come into the hubs. The unfounded cases, we realize that we're not totally great at predicting, but we are pretty good. Not great, not perfect. But we want the unfounded cases to come into the hub, so at least the kid can get a physical and this psychological screening tool. Now, this happened this summer, and they're working on it. It's a work in progress. They are going to try to do it. I personally don't know if they really have the person power to be able to navigate this, but your idea has a lot of merit, and in other countries they do this. They have a 60-day follow-up. That's really important.
It would be better served if it was outreach.
Sure.
Yeah, really.
Along with that, the same situation exists we do have a foster parent population out there. And there are many instances where there's a reported incident of suspected abuse in foster homes. And that the state licensing worker, there's help for the DCFS worker through EAP. There's nothing for the foster parent. Nothing. There's no resources. If they are traumatized, and we lose a lot of foster parents because they're just. So I think you're absolutely right. The follow-up for the unsubstantiated cases just gets lost.
I want to respond to that. There is very little available for foster families unless they're part of an FFA. And many private nonprofits have a contract to be a foster family agency. And they have smaller caseloads, and they do give that kind of a response and debriefing and help. But you're absolutely right. For the families that are not in an FFA, that are with the generic, Department of Children and
Which
Family
is the majority,
Services.
yeah.
Which is the majority.
Right.
They don't get this kind of service. So now that our agency is being more responsive to client and consumer feedback, here's what I want to say. You guys are consumers. So my last slide is, how can you use this information? You think of yourself as a consumer. You are, number one, you are involved with agencies that are part of the spokes out of this hub, and you're delivering services. But I want to say, as a consumer, you have a stake in these services being really good. Because when they're really bad, we're causing more harm, okay? But when they're good, we are making healthier adults who are going to be the people that are in charge in 20 years from now. How about this? I say, when you're on the other side of your vulnerability, don't you want somebody in charge who has been listened to, who's been thoughtfully responded to, who's been able to, get somebody to marshal resources for them and enable them to integrate whatever experience they've had, so they're not just randomly going off and, projecting their experiences onto everybody else? Don't we want this? Yeah, we'll be lining up in the Social Security office and applying for these kids who are going to be our case managers. I say it that way because I say it that way in training, because I want to get the children's services workers to be thinking, hey, if this is a community that you intend to grow old and vulnerable in, you have a stake in this. You do. You actually do. And you have a stake in having a safe community too, unless of course you want to, barricade yourself in your house and just call out for groceries, which is what some people do. But that's not my version of what I think is a healthy community. So the way that you can use some of this material, I'm sort of time sensitive here. I want to make sure that I dismiss you guys right away. You can keep yourself current in the research in these areas. You can access, I have 3 websites, actually 4 here. I really encourage you to go to that Strengthening Families Framework information that's on First 5, because many agencies participate in that. And it's a wonderful opportunity to help parents see, we can help you be strong and be what you want to be. And there isn't anything that parents would object to in that. Familiarize yourself with the Evidence-Based Clearinghouse, and don't keep it a secret. Tell your colleagues and tell your clients to go there. And if they don't have internet access, that's why we have libraries. Okay, to involve yourself in further training, how about this? Ask the children's services workers that you deal with when you have a Native American case or an African American case, ask them if there's a parent partner. Ask them if there's a cultural ambassador. Why not? You know about this. Ask them if the kids that you're working with have actually had a KDA mental health screening. You'll show yourself as having understood what the things that they've been told that they have to comply with. Invite the district attorney's office to do this kind of a presentation to you guys and see what happens. And lastly, I want to say that I want you guys to thank yourself for doing this kind of work, because we all have a stake in creating kids that are healthier than they otherwise would have been without our intervention. You are part of a network of the child welfare system. You are the spokes. You're actually helping to hold it up. You pay for this with your tax dollars. You're a consumer. And again, if this is a community that you intend to grow old in and get on the other side of your vulnerability, you want these kids to have been given a fair shot at getting their mental health needs and receiving justice. So thanks so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. My name is Colleen Friend. I'll give you my telephone number as long as you don't call me and tell me that you want to report child abuse. Okay. All right, thank you very much.
We have about 2 minutes for questions, if anybody has a question. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the ACE study again.
Yes.
Did they rank the traumas in terms of which traumas tend to be more traumatizing? And the one particularly I'm interested in is out-of-home placement.
No, my understanding from reading the ACE is that they did not, but they gave people an ACE score, and they definitely found out the more higher ACE score you had from 1 to 9, the higher ACE score, the more health problems you had and resorted into these various coping
No, I
mechanisms.
understand that. I'm just curious where out-of-home placement ranks in that.
Well, if you ask me, I would say I would rank it pretty high, but I don't think Vince Folletti did do that. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Besides enrolling at UCLA, how can we find out about ACE?
Oh, the ACE study, actually, I don't think I put it on here, but I think if you just Google ACE, comma, Kaiser, ACE, comma, San Diego. Anybody have other ideas? I think you'll come up. Vince Folletti is was the main investigator on it and the primary author of many of things that were written, and another guy too that his name just fell out of my head. But that's important information, and it's easy to understand and great to teach from, those of you that teach. Yes? Oh, my phone number? My phone number is 323-343-4696. Repeat it, 323-343-4696. And I also, on this front page here, I give a shameless plug. I'm also involved with the California Social Work Hall of Distinction. And we have sort of a Hall of Fame for social workers. And if anybody is interested in that or would like to make a nomination, we're going to have nominations open until the end of December. You might want to visit the website because we're going to have an event in 2010 that you might think about. Anybody have otder questions?
What does ERDD stand for?
Oh, it says, blah, blah, blah. I wrote it down here so I wouldn't. Eliminate racial disproportionality and disparity. Disparity and disproportionality. Because disparity and disproportionality are related concepts, but they're not the exact same thing. Thank you, Paula. I'm delighted to. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen, for being here. Thank you so much.